Ione awoke as the first rays of dawn painted streaks of orange and pink across the smoke-gray sky. As she emerged from her stone cottage, the pungent odor of bubbling fish guts wafted up from the cauldrons scattered across the rocky black beaches, mixing with the salt-tinged sea breeze. Another day in her endless existence on this strange island. Queen Cymbeline, the mercurial ruler of the island's legions of black cats, stretched languidly on her sunning rock, pausing her grooming to glare at Ione with glowing amber eyes. Ione returned the cat's stare levelly as she strode past, her leather boots crunching on the obsidian sand. The dark waters roiled and frothed against the shore, alive with the ceaseless motion of the tides. As always, Ione felt the sea's magnetic pull on her blood and bones. She gazed out at the mist-shrouded waves stretching to the horizon, shivering slightly as an unnatural chill seeped into her skin despite her thick woolen cloak. The ocean held many secrets, ancient and terrible, ones that even she, despite her seeming immortality, could only guess at. Putting such unsettling thoughts aside, Ione made her way up the winding stone stairs that snaked through the island's patchwork jade mountains. Panting slightly from the steep climb, she arrived at the Point of Pascal, a jagged cliff that cleaved the island's heart like a plunging dagger. Far below, trapped by the vagaries of tide and current, a seething mass of fish churned the waters to a chaotic froth. Ione smiled. Time to begin the day's harvest. She tied her large woven nets to the iron stakes driven deep into the cliff's edge, muscles tensing as she heaved the billowing mesh over the brink and down towards the surface. At the distant splashes, a cacophony of eager yowling built from the surrounding slopes. They were coming. A seething tide of inky fur and flashing fangs poured over the rocks, hundreds upon hundreds of ravenous black cats drawn by the promise of fresh fish. Ione appraised the chittering horde with a critical eye as they swarmed around her feet, picking out the handful she knew by name, the pampered denizens of her cottage. Queen Cymbeline launched herself from the feline mass, scaling Ione's cloak to perch imperiously on her shoulders. The cat's needle-sharp claws dug painfully into Ione's skin through the rough-spun fabric, and she bit back a curse. Immortal or not, the queen's affections never failed to draw blood. Ignoring the warm trickles running down her back, Ione peered over the cliff's edge, gauging the net's progress by their lengthening ropes. A memory stirred, rising from the depths of her mind like some ancient leviathan breaching the waves. Blurred images of weeping, of cold and fear and despair. The ghost of a little lost girl, adrift on the pitiless tides. Ione shook her head, dispelling the fragmentary visions. That child was long gone, replaced by whatever she was now. Person, myth, monster? She no longer knew. All that mattered was the endless cycle of harvesting fish and feeding her feline companions. The purpose to which the island had bound her for centuries uncounted. At last, the nets reached their terminal depth. Ione waited, allowing the teeming schools of fish to thrash themselves to exhaustion within the inescapable confines. As the sun climbed towards its zenith, she took hold of the straining ropes and heaved, the coils of wiry muscle in her shoulders and back flexing and bunching beneath her skin. Slowly, inch by painstaking inch, the nets rose from the abyss, swollen with the twitching silver-skinned bodies of innumerable piscine species strange and varied. Ione didn't know all their names, but she knew their taste, the particular sweetness or brininess of each kind's flesh, and which of her feline charges preferred which. An encyclopedia of culinary knowledge accrued over an eternity of gutting and scaling and stewing. With a final tremendous effort, Ione dragged the last of the nets over the cliff's lip, the caught fish within ceasing their struggles as they gulped the air in vain. The cats swarmed forward in a ravenous tide, yowling and spitting, their flashing teeth and churning limbs a blur of deadly motion. Ione flung the choicest specimens into the fray, watching in grim amusement as the strongest and quickest snatched the lion's share of the take. Nature's timeless truth, the survival of the ruthless, a law that governed cats, fish, and humans alike. She worked quickly to stow the remaining haul, plucking out the meaty tuna and strange, ethereal wishfish that were her chosen sustenance. The rest would keep the island's feline hordes fed until the morrow, and the morrow after that, and all the thousands yet to come, an unbroken chain of days and nights, sunrises and sunsets, as changeless and ever-repeating as the tides themselves. Her share of the catch secured, Ione began the long descent back to her cottage, leaving the gorging cats to their spoils. Queen Cymbeline, belly distended with fresh meat, rode on her shoulders, a low rumbling purr vibrating against the nape of Ione's neck. As the shadows lengthened and the sky darkened to a bruised purple, Ione reached her front door. The delicate carvings etched into the stone by her own hands centuries ago had long since worn to shallow grooves, erased by salt wind and spray. She crossed the threshold into the single cluttered room, setting her sack of fish down by the hearth and absently scratching the queen behind her ears with a calloused hand. The cat stretched, then leapt down and sauntered over to the nest of blankets that served as Ione's bed, turning in a tight circle before settling into a regal sphinx-like pose. Ione set about the familiar tasks of cleaning and prepping her catch, the motions so long practiced they required no thought. As the tuna fillets sizzled in an iron skillet and the wishfish roasted on spits over the crackling flames, she pondered, not for the first time, the strangeness of her own existence. Why was she here, on this lost speck of wind-scoured rock? Ageless, unchanging, harvesting the ocean's bounty to feed a host of midnight-hued felines as the eons marched past in an endless parade? The obvious answer, that she was being punished, seemed less and less likely as the centuries wore on. For what sin could demand such an eccentric penance, and what god or demon would devise so odd a prison? No, there was a deeper mystery here, written in the crash of waves and the dart of silvery fish, the yowling of cats and the ache of her own deathless flesh. A riddle beyond her current understanding. Still, there was a strange sort of peace to be found in her labors, a mindless animal joy in the burning of muscle and sinew, the slick glide of a gutting knife through an iridescent piscine flank, the warm nuzzling fur of a cat seeking a choice morsel or a gentle touch. Simple pleasures, to be sure, but no less real for their simplicity. In her unguessable lifespan, she had learned to savor such modest delights. The sudden pressure of a small furry body against her ankles shook Ione from her ruminations. She looked down to see Richard III, a tiny black kitten barely old enough to toddle, purring and kneading at her bare feet with his soft paws. Smiling despite herself, Ione reached down and scooped the little scrap of fluff up, cradling him against her chest. Richard blinked slowly up at her, his red eyes gleaming with untroubled adoration. If she was a monster, at least she was a benevolent one to those under her care. Cats fed, cottage tidied, Ione banked the fire and carried Richard over to her nest of blankets. The other denizens of her home were already clustered there, Calchas stretched to his full length, exposing his fluffy white belly, Pandarus curled into a perfect circle, paws over his little pink nose. Even Queen Cymbeline deigned to shift over and make room as Ione settled down into the warm pile of purring bodies. As the last of the light faded from the strange square panes set into the cottage walls and the great silver coin of the moon rose to cast its pale radiance across the island, Ione let herself drift into the shallow waters of sleep, rocked on a tide of soft breaths and thrumming heartbeats. Tomorrow would bring more fish, more cats, more unanswerable questions. But for now, she could rest, content in the knowledge of a job well done. On the black sand beaches, a fish flopped from the shallows, its bulging eyes reflecting the uncaring stars. It gasped its last, and the island dreamed on, and Ione with it, the ancient cycle poised to begin anew with the rising sun.